Good morning all. My name is Brett Edwards. I'm the National Chair for NASHICS. Welcome to today's webinar. Our webinar is on personal emergency evacuation plans. It will be presented by Darren Franks, as you can see on your screen. Darren is Globex Europe Limited, although Globex Europe Limited is actually international, with 30 years or more than 30 years of experience in fire safety. Currently covers the care sector, local authorities, education, and much more, as I'm sure you can appreciate, delivering fire safety management and fire evacuation equipment. Just to let everybody know, this presentation is being recorded and will be made available subsequent to this webinar. Equally, the presentation itself will be made available. What we would ask is that there's quite a lot of information to cover in this particular presentation, and therefore if you have any questions, if I could ask you to put it into the chat. If we have opportunity at the end of the presentation, then obviously we will go to Q&As and I will grab some questions out of there. Obviously, if we don't get to answer all of your questions, we will produce a document, Q&A document, which will outline your questions and obviously Darren's answers. Darren's contact details will also be available during this presentation, as are national executives. So if you need to catch up with any of the national executive team following this webinar, please visit nashics.org and you'll find our contact details there. As I say, it will be recorded, the presentation will be made available. So it leads me now to pass over to Darren, who is going to take over. Darren.
Thank you for the introduction. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. And from talking to Brett, I guess there's already some experts out there on fire safety, evacuation, some care sector. So I'm just here really to share my experiences, which I hope you find some of it useful. And like I say, the main point of I joined NASHICS was obviously the collaborative working, sharing information, because in my experience I find a lot of people do keep stuff to themselves as opposed to being open with things. And when it comes to PEEPs, I also find that who leads on it? Is it fire safety? Is it health and safety? Is it care? And sometimes that's why it goes, in my opinion, wrong in some cases. So hopefully you find it useful. I'm going to share the screen now. I'm going to turn the video off purely because I don't like looking at myself. And to be honest, I'm not a fan of this type of presenting. I prefer face-to-face or in an auditorium of some sort, but I'll do my best. One moment. A good start. Can't even get to. Right, so hopefully that bit's worked. Brett, are you able to confirm you can see the screen? Good, thank you. Yeah, so again, thank you for inviting me to speak, and thank you for everyone for attending. So by quick introduction, as Brett's just said, my background is fire safety. I've had over 35 years, starting in the Middle East, doing onshore and offshore fire safety, and then came back to specialise in fire safety management in the UK. And again, as Brett said, a lot of experience within the care sector. I was with a leading UK university for a number of years that was linked to one of the largest hospitals as well. So again, a fair bit of experience within care. And although my background was fire safety just over 10 years ago, not necessarily a gap in the market, but could see that there wasn't too much focus on getting people out of buildings. So we established Globex, which is our brand of evacuation equipment, even though we still do fire safety. And the aim of what we do is obviously just raising awareness, as you can see on the screen there, and improving standards within the sector, which you'll see as we go along, hopefully. Oh, sorry, press that twice. So with personal emergency evacuation plans, hopefully you're all familiar with them and you can read that. I'm not going to read everything word for word, but obviously the aim of what we're going through today is just to give you the benefit of my experiences. And obviously a PEEP is to provide assistance for getting people out of the building. And it is the responsibility, as you can see there, of the responsible person for the building, which again, in some care environments might be quite easy to determine, and in others it may not. And also who's writing the PEEP. It's important to make sure that are competent and confident to do it. And you may have a questionnaire, you may have a simple template, but like I say, by the end of it, you're going to see some of the things which we've experienced. So who requires a PEEP? So first of all, the main focus is on mobility impaired, whether that be disabled, the elderly, injured. Could be a sporting incident at the weekend where someone's broken their leg, whereas they may not have needed a PEEP on the Friday, but when they started work on the Monday, they may need it. So as you can see on there, it's not just residents within the care sector. It could be a member of staff or a regular contractor that you're on site with would need to go through the same process. Maybe not so in depth, but they would still need a PEEP. And like I say, the mobility side of it is where more assistance is needed, whereas when it's a hearing impairment or visual or mental health, obviously the carers are there anyway, and there'll be those appropriate procedures, hopefully, for ensuring the safe evacuation of everyone. Some of the things we've come up with, which again, everyone's heard of PEEPs, but we've gone into various premises, whether it's in the care sector, retail, offices. Some say that it's the responsibility of the fire risk assessor to produce the PEEP, which clearly it's not. They should be identifying where there's shortfalls if you haven't got a PEEP process in place, or if you haven't got any equipment. And like I say, many places we've been in, we're told that they're compliant because nothing was mentioned in the fire risk assessment. So some of you may be aware I've done a talk on fire safety a few months ago, but it may be because the fire risk assessment isn't suitable and sufficient. So with all of this, I would encourage everyone for you to take ownership and take responsibility for everything and not be dependent on outside influences. Just because the risk assessor hasn't identified something doesn't necessarily mean they're right. And you may need to do your own due diligence to make sure that you are compliant. And some, believe it or not, still think it's the role of the fire service. And there is a lack of understanding of current requirements, which we'll look at shortly. And even with the fire service, the fantastic work they do. Unfortunately, I had it just the other week actually in a school with children with special needs. They told me that the fire service had recently been in for an audit, and they'd said not to worry too much about PEEPs and evacuation equipment because they would get them out, which clearly is wrong. But we're hearing these sort of stories, I won't say daily, but certainly where our teams are out on site, they've been potentially turned away because they've been told by the local fire service that they don't need to worry, which clearly they do. It can be that obviously a member of the fire service who's gone in there knows a member of staff or is friends with them. But I would encourage you, that is incorrect advice. And obviously with the fire service, there could be another incident. It may not be the local fire service that turn up anyway, it could be another county. So again, you have to take responsibility for your own premises, the risk assessment, PEEP process and record keeping and everything. And the PEEPs that we have seen, sometimes they're not detailed enough, which again, you'll see by the end. My philosophy is always keep it simple. I've seen everything from a one-page PEEP to something that's 30 pages long, with it clearly people don't read or understand it. And as I said at the beginning, there is a lack of awareness, in my opinion, of PEEPs. Whilst there's been a lot of changes in fire safety, and in the last year or so, there's a huge focus on fire doors, as I'm sure everyone's aware, the need for checking those. The focus on getting people out of buildings isn't always the same. It tends to be focused to get them in, and not necessarily, as I say, getting them out. And some of the PEEPs we have seen obviously should be covering day and night shift requirements, which again, in the questions that you have before you produce your PEEP, I would encourage that you do look at this and look at the big picture of staffing, because obviously during the day, you'll know, some of you will know better than I, plenty of staff around. At night time, maybe there isn't, and also the need of everyone being aware of what they should be doing, and also updating and reviewing PEEPs. Once they're done, it is a live process. You can have someone where their disabilities may worsen, or the opposite, they may get better. So again, the PEEP process needs to be updated. We had an incident recently where a gentleman was moved from a ground floor to an upper floor of a building. And then it was after the event that they've realised they need to update the PEEP for the building. So again, I would encourage you to be aware of the changes of the individuals. And also with PEEPs, are sometimes not even referenced during training and fire drills, which again, as I just said, it's not a one-off tool. It's something that it should form part of all fire safety training. so that all staff are aware of what the process is, what information is captured, and more importantly, what their role is when the fire alarm goes off and what they need to do. And again, as I said earlier, sorry if I'm repeating myself, it's only produced for residents. Some people believe that's the case, and clearly it's not. It's anybody that goes in the building, which, although we're focusing on PEEPs, there's also some will call them GEEPs, which is a general emergency plan, which again is something that if it's a care home, for example, and you have visitors coming, it could be that the visitor is in a wheelchair and they're then permitted upstairs to the first or second floor. So again, they need something in place. You're not going to go through a full questionnaire with them, but I'd encourage that obviously visitors with that form of disability or that may need assistance, you keep them to the ground floor or a meeting room rather than allowing them up into the building. And having the wrong evacuation equipment, which again, excuse me, I'm not here as a sales pitch, but it is quite shocking that the amount of people these days probably just go on to Google, Googling evacuation equipment, come up with a transit chair, which isn't designed for going downstairs, but they see it's the cheapest, think it ticks a box, stick it on the wall, and clearly it's the wrong product. And then if we're asked to go around for some other purpose and see them, when we point out that they're the wrong product, again, it's back to who's actually purchased the equipment and why. So do make sure that you get the right equipment that's fit for purpose. We've also had other cases where they've had evacuation sheets, and as well, I was told every bed had an evacuation sheet under it on the upper floors, but actually when we looked, they weren't. They'd been taken off some time ago. So again, it was assumed that they were there, and they weren't. Again, others that have had evacuation sheets under mattresses, whilst they're a great product and they serve a purpose, depending on the layout of the room, when you watch videos on the use of all evacuation equipment, it tends to be in a very well staged area. Whereas obviously if it's in a bedroom, the bed may be up against a wall, or you need to take that person through a single leaf door to the bedroom, which the mattress, it may be difficult. So again, it's important that all equipment that's purchased is fit for purpose, and you have demonstrations of it and understand how it should be used. And of course, making sure that they're in place, which is part of the ongoing checks and maintenance of your buildings anyway. And it is worth noting that unlike fire extinguishers that everyone's familiar with and is covered in fire training, with evacuation equipment, it's very different. There aren't always set British standards for the maintenance where they should be located. So people are free to make it up as they go along. So again, that's where we're working with colleagues to try and raise awareness of the needs for maintaining high standards. And again, just raising awareness of what is available out there and what's needed. Bariatric users, again, that's something else that needs to be considered within the PEEP. Like I say, there's great products on the market, but are they fit for purpose? Are they used for a larger person? And again, comes back to if you haven't got provisions to get people out, questioning whether they should be there in the first place. Again, been in some places where, I hate to say even the care sector, where there is no trained personnel for the equipment. With the turnaround of staff there, people that were trained have moved on and it hasn't been kept up to date. So again, something I'd encourage you to be aware of, that where you have got equipment, there is training and there's refresher training and reviewed when personnel change. And also the maintenance checks, which under various other guidance, there's a requirement for maintenance. So all equipment should be checked. And also with the PEEPs, once you've got them in place, I've already said about training, to make sure that the training is fit for purpose, and so are the emergency procedures, doing a fire drill, and making sure that the procedures are effective. A few months ago, I was at a care home in Suffolk, and that was for a risk assessment, and they asked me to witness a fire drill. And to my amazement, the alarm was set off and every member of staff came out to the assembly point and left the residents in the building. So again, there was a confusion over state procedures. To be fair, it was a care group that had just been taken over by acquisition, and it was all going through and changes of staff. But I'll say, to be fair, it's not, people were left in the building, which, as we all know, is wrong. And even when regulators are coming round, again, I know you'll be from all over the country, so I'm not naming any particular regulator, but we have had cases where some have been in and the home's got a good or outstanding, yet the fire service may have gone in and issued a deficiency notice. So again, it's not helpful to the building management, which is another reason why, as you'll see as we go through this presentation, is that people are aware and satisfied that they've got appropriate provisions in place without depending on the fire service, depending on the type of property, of course, that we'll move on to shortly. And as it's saying at the bottom there, the responsible persons must be satisfied that everyone can be evacuated and that suitable and sufficient provisions are in place. And as we all know, with whatever sector you're in, various people may be given platforms and so-called experts or sales personnel giving advice. I just encourage that responsible persons and duty holders, as I keep saying, take responsibility for their own building and ownership of it. So it doesn't matter who comes in, whether it's an enforcing authority, whether it be a salesman or whatever, you can speak with confidence about what you've got in place, how it works, and you're satisfied with what you've got is effective. So moving on to requirements, which again, some of you will be able to, I'm not going to teach anyone to suck eggs. Some of you will be experts maybe on various requirements here, but at the top there I've put moral requirements, because regardless of legislation and changes currently going on, there are moral requirements. And at the end of the day, a lot of this, as with fire safety as well, is common sense. So I would encourage, although people can get wrapped up with understanding the legislative requirements which support everything, it is important to take the appropriate action yourselves and that it's fit for purpose for your building. And it is worth noting here with the Equality Act, a few years ago, it wasn't a care provider, it was another sector, but I gave a seminar and basically said that fire safety and does overrule the Equality Act insofar as they felt they had to let everybody into their buildings. And when we explained, well, actually, you don't. If you haven't got provisions to get them out, they shouldn't be in there in the first place. The room went silent and I was shot down. But after further discussion, people did understand then what they were needed to do. And obviously introduced a PEEP process. And I know it's very different if it's a public building or a work environment or a care sector. So again, just encouraging you that there is an understanding and an overview of all of this, but it's also moral requirements. And I'm conscious we may have some people in Scotland, so forgive me, I've got the regulatory reform order on here, but the principles will all be pretty much the same, because we still get questioned, well, where does it say we have to do these things? So again, because of my background in fire safety, it's just reminding people, which I'm again not going to read all to you, but just taking a few of the articles out of the regulatory reform order. Terminology like reasonably practicable, which again, what's reasonably practicable to one person may not be to another. And so again, comes back to the responsible person and duty holders actually taking responsibility, understanding their buildings and what needs to be done. And the fire risk assessment, as we said earlier, what's suitable and sufficient. I see a lot of computer app type risk assessments, and I've seen them for some large care organisations. And even in my opinion, they weren't suitable and sufficient, but they managed to get them done quite cheaply, which I think was the main reason that they were chosen. And as a result of the audit that we done, we encouraged the fire safety done an audit of the premises, which they did, and they came to the same conclusion. So again, fire risk assessments, lots of people are offering them, but within care and depending on the purpose group of the building, some are very specialist. So again, when it comes to the risk assessment, I would encourage that you do your due diligence. And if you're not doing them internally, make sure you use a third-party accredited person. And also do check that they've got experience within your sector. Anyone can say they do a risk assessment, but have they done anything in the care homes? They may have just done offices. Fire safety arrangements. And again, these are all articles of the regulatory reform order. They're not things that I've made up there. And again, terminology, arrangements that are appropriate. Again, what's appropriate to one may not be another. And again, most of you will be employing 5 or more, so things need to be documented. And you can see here, having effective planning, organisation, control, monitoring, and review of measures, which, again, reviewing of fire risk assessments and reviewing of PEEPs is just as important. And again, just reminding people that, it's things that in some cases must be possible for persons to evacuate premises as quickly and as safely as possible. Appropriate procedures, again, fire drills, which I know in a care environment, and again, depending on the purpose group of the building, I know you may not want to put residents to the stress and duress of a fire drill, so you may even consider tabletop exercises which again is something that the responsible person and stakeholders need to document. So they need to be satisfied that procedures are effective. And if I know a lot of care providers that we work with, they do 1 fire drill for day staff and 2 a year for night staff. Obviously, they may have false alarms in the meantime, which again, that is a test of procedures. And then the lessons learned from those if they need to make any changes. Training, again, as I said earlier, the PEEP process needs to be an essential part of fire safety training. Again, as with the risk assessor, who provides the training is important. A lot of people will just have someone to come and provide fire warden training, for example, that doesn't even cover the use of evacuation equipment. And maintenance, as I said earlier, under other regulations, which I know a lot of care providers now are going for mats and sledges, which are great. And you may be able to do your internal checks, whereas when it comes to other types of equipment, stair climbers and evacuation chairs, you may need to get someone in to do that. And again, just a reminder, the fire nationwide, most are fire and rescue service, not fire and evacuation services. And as I said at the beginning, there are still so many people that believe it's down to the fire service to get people out of the building. Blocks of flats is not obviously very different. So it's sheltered housing, there's different requirements, and that's why I'm a bit careful what I say, because I'm not talking specifically about care homes. It depends on the type of building. So considerations prior to a PEEP, and again, in my opinion and experience, is first of all understanding the type of premises, whether it is supported housing or it is a care home. Obviously, it's very different requirements, so it's an understanding of the basics to start with. Understanding what the fire strategy is for the building. I've been into a lot of care providers, and it's assumed that there's progressive horizontal evacuation, where people can move across the building, but it's not, because the fire compartmentation doesn't allow that. And so it works on simultaneous, which means getting everybody out of the building when the fire alarm goes off, which again, depending on the size of the building, staffing, would you be able to achieve that? So again, it is essential that you understand the strategy for the building and the procedures that accompany that. And for progressive horizontal evacuation, you may have seen this diagram, I haven't drawn it myself from various guidance documents, would be the case that somebody, for example, in, let's say, this room is between 2 fire doors, so they're moved progressively along the building, which again, we often come across people saying that we don't need evacuation equipment because we've got progressive horizontal evacuation, which is great if you don't need it, but if a fire was to develop or the compartmentation isn't as it should be, ultimately you've got to keep moving and you would have to go down the stairs. So even where progressive horizontal evacuation is in place, it's essential that you do have the appropriate provisions in place if the fire was to spread. And you can see here just one example, so you've got hundreds of these sort of pictures. Here you can see a fantastic job's been done of the making good fire compartmentation. And here, which apparently have been like this for a couple of years, hadn't. So for the good work that has been done, has been undone here, which then negates the requirements, and you wouldn't be able to have progressive horizontal evacuation because of the separation between the various compartments. So other considerations, equipment required, is it in the correct location and have you got the correct number? Again, we've been into some places where they, for example, might have just had one evacuation product, yet they've got 30, 40 people in the building. And when you put to them, what are you going to do? There's blank faces, which again, this whole point of a PEEP process is for the individual, but also it's understanding, as I say, the strategy for the building and what type of equipment you need, where it's located. You know, means of escape should be almost the same for a mobility impaired person as someone who's able-bodied. And the fire risk assessment, again, checking if there was any significant findings outstanding from that as well. So again, we've already said about the fire risk assessment prior to the PEEP. The procedure for investigating the fire alarm also. As I said earlier, where we experienced this one where someone's evacuated, all the staff evacuated the building. No one went to the panel to see where the which device had been activated. No one went to investigate it. And because I was observing, believe it or not, they thought I was going to start getting involved, which I made it clear I was only there to observe. So again, the requirement for understanding what the procedure is. Obviously, for most of you, will be familiar. And again, sorry, I'm not talking about blocks of flats or sheltered housing. In a care home, if it comes up on the panel, what zone it is, identifies the room. Someone goes and investigates, providing they've had the training and it's safe to do so. If it's not a fire, you'll be silencing and resetting the alarm yourself. So potentially you don't need to be evacuating everyone immediately. So again, understanding what the procedures are for the building. And even with progressive horizontal evacuation, sorry if I'm jumping ahead of myself here, obviously the moving to a different compartment would be deemed as a place of relative safety, but ultimately you do need to have provisions to take people to a place of complete safety, which would be outside the building. So again, the PEEP process isn't just moving to another compartment, it's outside the building. So again, you need to look at where is the assembly point. Is it gravel? What's, depending on what the product is that you would need, will it work outside as well? So again, looking at the bigger picture of the building and procedures. And as a scenario I gave earlier, the location of residence. I know someone like me has the easy bit, keep everyone on the ground floor, but I know it's not always practical to do that, but it is a consideration. And like I say, responsible persons do need to be clear in their mind if they know they can't have provisions, whether it be equipment and staff to evacuate. You do need to start considering where you're putting people in a building as opposed to just allowing them to go because we've got an empty room up on the second or third floor of a building. Designating someone, a competent person to complete the PEEP. Again, there's a lot of good training courses out there. Some are online as well. There's a lot of information available on the internet, as we all know. But internally, it is important that you have the responsible person is satisfied who's doing and producing the PEEP has had appropriate training, whether that's face-to-face or online, and is competent to do so. Also have a template that's right for you, which we'll look at some in a minute. And like I say, there's lots available. You may all be doing things perfectly anyway. But if you do have an organisation that's got multiple sites, again, I'd encourage that you have a template that's consistent across your sites, although they'll be tweaked to the building. And obviously, as we say, the individual's needs, at least it's the same template so that duty holders can be satisfied with what they're doing across their estate. And things like this. Just NASHICS, one of the reasons I joined was that it's great for sharing information and learning lessons from others. And I would encourage that. As I said at the beginning, I know a lot of people keep information to themselves, but sharing and working collaboratively with others. I don't think anyone's got a perfect system, but if you can work together to produce something, that's a way forward in my mind. And you can see from these pictures as well, where I was just alluding to the location of the assembly point. Here, obviously not going to name them. Hopefully you can't zoom in on any of those pictures to see any names, no. But you evacuate the building, come around the outside of the building, get to this gate, and you can see there is the bolt's on the outside of the gate, which obviously isn't effective if you're evacuating. You won't be able to get out from that way. So again, things like this should be picked up in a risk assessment, but as part of the PEEP process, as I say, it's not just to a place of relative safety. Potentially you'd need to get to ultimate safety outside the building to a designated assembly point. So again, walk the routes and make sure that your question set and PEEP process covers all of that. And considerations for the individual, that they can actually use the equipment, because sometimes it's assumed that one size fits all, whether it be a chair, mat, or whatever you choose. And it may be that you can't put them in it at that particular time, but again, an assessment needs to be done so that it is fit for purpose. Would that individual have any further needs? Do they need oxygen or medicine if they're coming out of a building? If it's something that won't necessarily all be kept in their room. But again, just think into the needs of the individual, what they may need that needs to be brought with them, or if it's available elsewhere. Additional clothing. I know we've enjoyed some good weather, but now it's changed. Wintertime, if it's raining outside, and as I say, if you're not moving across the building to a place of relative safety and have to go to an external assembly point, do you need other clothing? Have you got grab bags with appropriate, weatherproof items in for them? So again, just considering what needs to be done and where the assembly point is. Is it to another adjacent building you've got on the same site? Is it external? Is it in the shelter? I know for one smaller provider, it was actually putting residents into the van that they've got, their minibus, once they've evacuated the building. If it was pouring with rain, that's what they would do. And like I say, for the individual, also something else, which we'll look at various things at the moment, but it is important to realise that evacuation equipment for mobility impaired, it's not built for comfort. It is for getting people out of a building in an emergency. And the only time you should be using them is if it is a confirmed fire or incident. So we have a lot of places where the norm would be if the fire alarm goes off, everyone evacuates, obviously within the care sector. And again, I'm talking about care homes specifically, would be that it needs to be investigated. Do you need to put the individual and staff through the stress and duress of actually evacuating or not? It could have been not so much myself, but do my hairspray. I've set off a detector myself. Again, staff need to notify if they've accidentally hit a call point, getting that information to the person who's attending the fire alarm as soon as possible. And consideration for staff. Sorry if it's sounding repetitive now, but it is important with the staff training. There's an understanding of the process and what the specific in-house procedures are. And also that staff are willing and able to use any equipment that's been provided. We had one the other week and it seemed like the staff had more ailments than the residents and refused to, well, didn't want to participate in the training, which again, I know a lot of training is online these days, but if you're using evacuation aids, I would encourage that it is practical so people know exactly how the products work. And like I say, it's not just a matter of nominating someone, you will use this, they've got to be physically capable of using it as well. And obviously attending training, which goes without saying, and also participating in drills, as I said earlier, whether that be a physical drill where people do move, or if it's a tabletop exercise, it is essential that staff are involved in that. And it's not just senior management, as we've had in some cases, it's for local management authority to take responsibility and everyone to understand what they're doing. And again, just reinforcing the message of responsible persons, understanding what the current requirements are. They're satisfied with their PEEP process. And again, bearing in mind, this isn't something when the alarm's gone off, you grab a folder and have to read through the PEEP then. With the training and everything else, it should just be the norm. If the alarm goes off, staff are confident with what to do. And the PEEP is there. Obviously, you need to maintain it. It's documented, but it's not something that, well, in our experience, it's not going to be clipped to a wall. Someone grabs it and then as I read through it, then everyone needs to know what needs to be done. And suitable and sufficient, yeah, I think we've captured all of these anyway. But again, the biggest one at the bottom there, making sure that you've got provisions without depending on the fire service. And back to equipment, we said at the beginning, I know the main focus is on mobility impaired, but it could be a hearing impairment, a visual impairment, mental health conditions, which again, understanding what you do need. So most people in the care sector, in our experience, these are popular products, an evacuation sledge or mat, because there is training required, but it's much less than if it was for an actual chair product. Some have vibrating pages as part of their, if it's someone of hard of hearing, and also these sort of devices can be used and connected to fire alarms so that staff can investigate the alarm quickly because the display comes up here. Again, I know within the care sector there may be carers on site 24/7 who are going to take responsibility for the staff, but in other environments where care may not be there all the time, it's important to cover for anyone, again, through the PEEP process that's got a hearing impairment. You can get devices that are like, they hear the fire alarm or are connected to the fire alarm. They're a vibrating pillow to alert someone at night. So with the fire alarms, modern fire alarms these days would have flashing beacons. But again, if it's someone with a hearing impairment, just considering what you need there as well, which again, should all be drawn out of the PEEP process. And I've not put loads of documents on there because, again, after this, I'm of the opinion that it is something within the sector but could have more of a drive to produce, I'd say, the perfect PEEP. But again, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot of experts listening. I'm just giving my opinions, but a lot of the guidance documents will have standard templates for things. But as hopefully this presentation's highlighting, they don't necessarily capture everything. There is a need for the training, maintenance, and all of these things, which I believe need to be captured within the question set and the actual PEEP process. And again, with this one, you know, what a receptionist would do, as I said, about visitors coming into the building, whether there was a general emergency evacuation plan required, and just understanding that, because they're there to, they're the face of the business basically, and they need to understand what's done. And another example, again, I am a believer of keeping it simple. And if this, something like this works for you, that's fantastic. And again, I would encourage that it involves various stakeholders within your organisation, not just one. And again, as I said at the beginning, so many people can get involved in this, whether it be your fire officer, your health and safety officer, HR for the training side, it might be procurement who buy the equipment. And believe it or not, again, the larger the organisation, in my experience, sometimes these things don't come together. So procurement may have bought a product because it's the cheapest. The facility managers put it on the wall. HR has to organise the training. But again, hopefully, as this is emphasising, it's the responsible person that needs to be satisfied everything's in place. So again, it's what works for you. And again, with this one, you can see they've got a colour coding system as well, which is excellent. So I'm not saying there's any perfect right or wrong way, but it's, again, keeping it simple and what's working for you. And others now also, this is, again, the importance of doing fire drills and things like that. Staff may have fantastic feedback and lessons learned for you as well that maybe you hadn't considered. For example, marking on doors, again, by a colour code, whether it's someone who just needs like a fire warden, you'd go in there. If it's someone that's hard of hearing, whether you have a sign or something, but just having something that works efficiently for your building. And with this one as well, you can see here, they keep these in the grab bag for the fire service. And this is, if all else failed, as I said earlier, they're a fire and rescue service, not evacuation. So although we'll try and get things spot on, we all know things can go wrong. You have got the fire service there, and providing them with some information, they're not going to read through all your PEEPs. And I have been to some places, as I said earlier, where they've got all their PEEPs in a folder by the front door. The fire service aren't going to read through those. So it's important that people do remember that you need to do as much as you can to ensure everybody's out. Because again, it's potentially putting the lives of firefighters at risk if they're then having to come into the building to evacuate someone that you should have already done. And also potentially more of a loss of a building if they're not rescuing people. Sorry, if they are rescuing people, they're not doing a firefighting intervention. So potentially you're losing more of the building. So again, keeping information that you provide for the fire service simple as well. And the guidance documents, which again, I'm not going to click or go through all of these in depth, and hopefully from the audience, I know you'll already be familiar with these, but there is a lot of information out there. And again, as I keep saying, with the training, there's a lot of online training that's available to all providers now. So again, I'd encourage you, if you feel you have got shortfalls in some places, do have a look at them. And you may or may not be pleased to know that's my presentation as good as over. But hopefully the message that's come from it is, taking ownership and responsibility. I know post-Grenfell, there's a lot of talks and lots of changes in various legislation. But again, as one of the slides showed, it's the moral requirement. A lot of it is absolute common sense. So don't get too tied up with all the changes. I would encourage you look at what you've got in place. And if you do need assistance, help is out there. So apart from that, that's it. You hear me still, Brett?
Excellent. Thank you, Darren. That was really informative, and you'll be pleased to hear that the chat was quite lively. So we do already have some questions from some of the people that have attended. So and I'll just quickly go through these, and hopefully we'll still have a couple of minutes for any additional questions or comments from any of you that are attending. And once we've gone through these questions, if you do wish to raise a question or ask anything for clarity or suggest anything, then please feel free to raise your hand, simply so as we can see who wants to, and then we'll get you to unmute yourself. So the first question was from George Peel, and he asked about if there are viable alternatives to evac chair for transferring people via the stairs. I have to say that it was answered by Paul, who talks about ski sleds, evacuation sheets, things like the Outback mat, the Globex mat, those kind of things. Anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of viable alternatives?
No, that's spot on there. Like I say, my biggest point is that people have demonstrations of the equipment and they know it's fit for purpose, because we also have places that have had mats in and it's a narrow staircase with a turning in it, then you'd have to snap the person in half to get them around the stairs. So just it's ticked a box because you've got product, but is it fit for purpose? So yes, there's lots out there, but again, from my point, I'd encourage people do have demonstrations and have a clear understanding of how it works. And if it doesn't work, you need to consider relocating that person. Again, what's reasonably practical. But yeah, I think Paul's covered their evacuation. All different manufacturers have different terminology, but yeah, sheets, mats and chairs.
Absolutely, thank you. Next question's from Sarah Hampson. Are there different requirements for bariatric residents, people?
It's the same requirement. It's just the different equipment that will be used and maybe different staffing resources. Because again, as I was saying, the videos that show these products being used is in a perfect setting. Someone may be built my size, but you may have less able staff to do things, and the products may have a safe working load of 150 kilos, for example, whereas you may need a lot more, and you may need 4 people as opposed to 2. So again, it's just looking at all your individual requirements. Like I said, there's a lot of information out there, and there is products available for specifically for bariatric.
Okay. Next question, I don't think it's particularly easy to answer, but I will ask it anyway. This one comes from Debbie, and Debbie asks, what do you recommend one staff member covering a night shift with 3 immobile residents? Evacuation sheets are normally 2 people for use. So obviously there's a staffing issue there, and I'm sure that there are many providers that will be asking the same question.
Yeah, and this is why things like this are so useful in people's different experiences. And like I say, someone like me coming around sort of has the easy bit, but it doesn't help anyone. Even with working with the fire service, I know they're not really in the business to be closing buildings and things like that. May issue deficiency notices, but the same principles are there. If people are in, you need to have provisions to get them out. Obviously, if it's sheltered housing, is slightly different to a care home. I know I didn't go too much in depth in there, but the fire service would have more of an active role, and you need to provide information for them, which again, this presentation isn't about that, but changes that are coming now for all this on residential flats. That's the difference with the care if it's in sheltered housing. But if it's a care home, like I say, from my point, and we have it a lot with student accommodation and all sorts, where you've just got maybe one porter on at night, maybe you need more staffing, and it comes back to the responsible person understanding what they're responsible for. Is the compartmentation there? We've had other places where they've had more fire suppression and just higher fire risk assessments to mitigate risks. But same principle, you do need to look at the type of premises and focus on how you would get people out. Excellent. And chairs can be used by 1. Sheets, I know some people have said they've used sheets for 1 as well, but it's hard work and you need that extra training. So again, there's products out there, but it needs the support of trained personnel as well.
Okay, thank you. And then Matt happened probably, and I'm sure Matt recognises, about 30 seconds before you mentioned about the rag rating of residents being a really good idea. And then you did your slides on that, but absolutely. And it seems that some local authorities are quite keen on that use as well, because it's quick and simple. I think the only thing I would add to that is that you just need to make sure that it's kept up to date. And as people's needs change, equally the rag rating, as you call it, would change along with the PEEPs. Debbie's asked about where you can get the templates that you talked about. This presentation, as I said before, will be made available to everybody on our website, nashics.org, under past events. So if you go to the events tab and then click on past events, you'll be able to get that there, equally as this presentation will be available. Also, I've got a couple more questions really quickly. So Linda Dixon has said, can you mention that some people using medical equipment that needs mains power would need to be evacuated to an area with power. So do we still consider community involvement? So I can actually see where that's kind of going in terms of the complications with medical equipment. Any comment on that one, Darren?
No, it's a good question, and I think it's one of those things that highlights the need for having a thorough question set and an appropriate PEEP, not just a standard template that's not covering that sort of thing. Because if, let's say, someone's life dependent, does that equipment need battery backup? Has that been considered, or where would they be moved to? We spoke about a place of relative safety. Has that got the power there? But ultimately, if they had to evacuate the building, then what? So again, it's all, there's not one size fits all, and I'm not going to be able to answer everything, but it certainly needs considering.
Yeah, well, it's all about dynamic assessment, isn't it, of the particular incident itself. Viren, and I'm hoping that I've said your name correctly, Viren has asked, how do you evacuate somebody who weighs 19 stone on an evacuation mat if the person is on the floor? Is the evacuation mat the right equipment?
If it's the right mat, I mean, this is again where it comes back to there's a lot of products out there. People just buy them, put them on the wall or whatever, and don't actually understand how you use them. And like I say, for training videos, don't show someone, they might show someone petite like me, rather than someone larger, that there is a bit of manual handling involved. And certainly us as a company, there's specialist companies out there that deal with manual handling, which is another, again, not teaching anyone to suck eggs. The use of a product is one thing, manual handling is something else. But I do know there are, I say this is where it can come in if it's something that needs to be kept under the bed. But again, comes back to staffing. Who's going to be able to pull someone 19 stone, especially downstairs? So again, I don't want to sound like a politician not answering things, because I think it's good having questions. But this is again what this dynamic debate and things is about, and anyone else's ideas.
And this one's a really interesting question from Lynette. And as a provider of such equipment, I'm hoping that you will be able to answer this. So basically, Lynette explains that they've got ski mat sheets in a couple of their services, but the manufacturer has told them not to use them for training purposes, as they should only be deployed a couple of times before being discarded. Do you recommend having a separate one for training purposes?
Yes, absolutely. It's a bit like training with a fire blanket, for example. Once that's been used, you discard it. But that's why I can't emphasise enough, and hopefully this presentation's highlighted, the need for training is so important, because again, people buy these products. If people aren't trained to use them, you've made matters worse, because you've recognised there's a need for something, but you're not doing the appropriate training. And again, it's for the service provider to take ownership, regardless of what someone like me says. You know, do your own due diligence. It could be that the manufacturer's just trying to, I don't know, maybe sell you more, but no, have one specifically for training would be more appropriate, that's for sure.
Okay, and I've got a question from Heather. Heather has said that you basically, as she was about to ask a question, you answered it, but she's saying that they have pressure from local authorities to allow individuals to remain in properties that they can't physically evacuate them from. They believe that this is because the fire service may have come in and said it's fine, that they can still allow them to remain. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and this is where hopefully one of the slides shows it's understanding the purpose group of the building. If it's a block of flats, and don't shoot me down, because I know post-Grenfell there's been a lot of talks about stay put policies, but blocks of flats generally would be designed where they can stay put, providing it's been maintained and the compartmentation's there. So it is understanding the building, which if is in this case the local authorities come round, you know, that is fine, and that is how the building's fire strategy is, that they can remain in their flats. But ultimately it's about providing information to the fire service as well, which soon I think more people will be hearing about emergency evacuation information sharing as a result of one of the findings from Grenfell. But yeah, so sorry, I know I've been talking a lot about care homes. Blocks of flats, stay put policy is still out there and will remain.
And is it fair to say that just for kind of more assurance from some of the providers, is that if they are advised from local authority, fire service, whoever, that is the best way forward, that they should certainly ask for that in writing, so as they have evidence of that particular conversation? And equally, am I correct in stating that with the stay put policy, the compartmentation, the grading is slightly higher, or it's certainly advised to be higher, i.e. an hour separation as opposed to 30 minutes?
Yeah, all of that. I mean, I would 100% get things in writing, because we're finding more and more, and again, I work with the fire service regularly. Operationally, when they're doing audits and things of buildings, they may say something in passing, and because they've got a uniform on, as opposed to, I mean, some people might don't think I'm selling them things, but they will say a passing comment that they don't need to worry about this, they don't need to worry about that, as mentioned earlier. But I would encourage you get everything in writing for something so significant. And you're right, with the stay put policy is more compartmentation would be enhanced. It's understanding the fire alarm, you know, it's not just compartmentation. So yeah, probably do another presentation just on that, to be perfectly honest. I'm conscious we could easily digress from PEEPs, but anything with the fire service, I would get in writing because, like I say, this school I was at the other week, they were ready to get rid of their evacuation equipment. And I wasn't thinking, oh God, we're going to lose business. I'm thinking they're wrong. They shouldn't be saying that. And this is where I think there needs to be more joined up working with regulators, the fire service and industry to give the same message as opposed to mixed messages, which isn't helpful.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question. Apologies to those whose questions haven't been answered. As I say, we will go through them after this webinar and we will answer all of the questions that have been asked so far and the ones that we didn't get to in writing, and we'll add that to the presentation when we distribute it to the attendees. But for the last question, do you need evidence of training on equipment? So obviously your evacuation equipment.
I'll say yes, because I won't turn my camera around. I normally say when the sun's shining, people don't worry about records and things like that. It's when it comes off and you may find yourself in front of a regulator in a court that you have to provide evidence that you've done what's reasonably practicable. So if you've got equipment and there's a recommendation that there's training with it, you should have the training. Even it doesn't necessarily have to be by an external provider, so long as someone with the organisations had the training, they can then pass it on to others. But yes, definitely record all training. Let's say not just for PEEPs, from a fire safety point of view, that for example, facilities may understand all the systems they got, the records in place, a bit like fire alarm testing, keeping a record of that. You do the same way for your evacuation equipment checks and training records.
Yeah, funnily enough, I was just about to say about checks as well, and that ongoing maintenance and ensuring that they're still in a reasonable condition, because certainly we've previously we've had mats that have deteriorated over time, where they've been in situ for some sort of 10 or 15 years. So definitely worth having those maintenance checks. Darren, thank you so much. That's been really, really helpful. And just by virtue of the amount of questions that are still coming in, I might add, clearly it's been very engaging, very informative. So a huge thank you for that. Leaves me to say that obviously that's the end of today's webinar. As I say, questions will be answered where we haven't got to them today. Apologies for that. And we'll send that out with the presentation. This has been recorded and will be made available on our website. And it really just leaves me to say that we have an upcoming event. We have our London Networker on the 1st of December. For further details on that and any other events, and equally NASHICS, please visit our website nashics.org. For those of you that are travelling, safe journey. For those of you that are not, equally a safe journey. Stay safe. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your continued support. And we will see you at the next webinar or conversation and catch up. All of which the details will be on our website. So thank you very much. Thank you again, Darren. That was excellent.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Right.